So I just wanted to cover off on some really important planning aspects to backpack hunting and what's worked for me. Others will have differing views, and that's great. That's what makes for an interesting hunting community. So the first thing that I spend a lot of time doing is looking through maps. Very, very important that you spend a fair amount of time looking at maps, understanding the terrain that you're going to be hunting in, researching access points, researching where tracks are, where four-wheel drive roads are, where campsites are, where maybe huts are, picking whether you want to be close to those sort of facilities or whether you want to be far away and removed from those facilities. And you know, that will depend on your preferences, your confidence, your experience levels, but really important that you spend a lot of time looking at maps. I'll go into a little bit more detail on some of the things I'm looking for in a map, and this is just a particular map of the head of the Poltar River. It's an area that I've spent some time in the past in New Zealand. Great area for big stags, and for me in particular, I'm looking for areas that have a good range of scrub cover for the alpine tops. So stags during spring and summer have a bit of cover up high where they're typically feeding up during their velvet time. Down low where there's bush cover, a good, whether it's a stand of beech forest or podocarp forest, that's something I'm looking for. And I'm also looking for saddles that I can myself go through to another catchment, or saddles where animals can move between catchments. And stags during the sort of period of March anyway and into parts of April, but particularly March, the stags will move great distances to mark their territory and settle down onto a group of hinds that they can mate with over the raw. If I'm hunting in winter time, then I'll be looking for more warmer and less challenging terrain. One, because I want to get away from the snow, but two, I also want to be in areas where there's lots of sun. So northern faces that get baked by the sun are important, and going to where there's still food available. And if there's snow up high, then I'll be typically focusing down lower in river valleys or off flats, bush flats, where there might be a bit of grass still left over that hasn't gone rank over the summer. I mean, getting onto main ridges is great. It gives you a great access way to just walking through big country and glassing into all sorts of different sides and aspects. And using leading spurs and ridges that help you get down through obviously belts of horrible subalpine scrub, but eventually they're nice spurs of bush that could hold deer at certain times of the year. And understanding that there are easier ways down into valleys through planning a particular route in advance of just getting there and just winging it is important. You can really shave time off your hunt by understanding the terrain that you're going to hunt in and being realistic about how long things take. In big country, it can take an hour to cover a kilometre. But then again, if you know what you're doing and you're experienced and you're fit, it might take you only an hour to cover 4 kilometres. That's route marching, no glassing. So when you're planning a trip, look at the terrain, factor in how far you're going to move when hunting that terrain, and try to not double back on country that you've already hunted. So for me, looking at maps is a great time to reflect on past trips and to plan future trips. And when I'm considering my hunting areas, I'm going to look at the weather systems and where they're coming from, the nature of the terrain, how long I've got. If it's going to be on the west coast, typically you want 5 days minimum, and ideally you want a week, or even 10 days would be ideal to really explore that country. And it is harder going on the west coast. You've got weather windows that you've got to work within, being a wetter climate, so a lot more rainfall, a lot more cloud cover, and that can really change a 7 or even a 10-day trip into 4 effective days hunting with the good weather. So I weigh that up. I look at the timing of the year, so seasonal aspects. Generally you can't really beat the weather in terms of stable, not guaranteed weather, but just a better probability of good weather in February and March. So the thing about New Zealand is it's got a very unique weather system. We've got for the South Island anyway, and I'll talk specifically about the South Island just because I love it down there and I've spent a lot of time hunting down there. The South Island's unique in that it's got, you know, two majorly different weather systems. You've got a west coast, very wet, temperate climate, which has a mixture of podocarp species, you know, that typical wet and quite a mossy, ferny understory, and then you come across onto the eastern side of that main divide and it's a lot drier, it's beech forest. And I look at it like this: you get southwesterly fronts that come through, or northwesterly fronts, anything coming from the west will generally rule the west coast out for me. I won't go hunting on the west coast if there's going to be westerly fronts bringing rain or cloud. Not that I won't hunt in those conditions once I'm there, but if I'm planning a trip and I want to get the best out of it, then I'll take into account which direction the weather's coming from. And if it is coming from the west, then the eastern side of the main divide is where I'll focus a bit more time in. And I know that in the headwaters of those east coast catchments you are going to get quite a bit of cloud cover, rain, mist come through, and it's going to influence your hunting experience on the east side, but it won't be anywhere near as prevalent as on the west coast. So that's something. If it's coming from the south or southeast, and the southeast weather fronts in New Zealand can actually be almost worse than hunting in a northwest system, because that cloud gets pushed in the southeasterly and often can get very claggy on the eastern side of the divide. So if the weather's coming from the south or the southeast, then I'll pop across onto the west coast and hunt the west coast of New Zealand. And you know, that's fundamental. I mean, I've got the weather apps. The one I go to, I like to go to a few different ones. I like to get the longer range forecasts, which I think you can get out to 28 days now. Obviously the probabilities of that weather being as they describe it is fairly low, but it's a good indicator of what might happen, and as it gets closer to that time frame, the probabilities of getting that weather window right increase. So you just monitor that as you get closer to your hunting trip. But once I'm about 7 days out, I will go to the MetView service, which just has a whole lot of maps, and I find the maps, the rain maps and the wind contouring maps, really insightful, and it gives you a good idea where the front's coming from. It tells you what the quantity of rainfall you could expect, and the wind by the isobars being quite close. Once I look at that weather system as it's coming in, I'll plan the whole hunting trip around what the weather's doing. So let's say, for instance, the weather is coming from the southwest and I'm picking to hunt on the east coast, one of the catchments on the east side of the main divide. I'll typically want to approach my hunting area from the northeast direction and work my way over the course of, I don't know, whatever the time frame is. It might be 5 or 6 days, heading always in towards the main prevailing wind. Now I know that in catchments you'll get katabatic influences where in the cooler times of the day the wind will sink down the valleys, and then in the warmer parts of the day the wind will carry up the valleys, and that's important you take that into account. But the prevailing winds is something that I'll really take into account. Which direction is the prevailing wind coming from? And it might switch around during the trip, but just bear that in mind and try to, for me anyway, I try to pick a route that's going to allow me to have the wind in my face as much as possible. And that's a way to ensure that you're always getting into virgin country. That's not to say other people aren't in that terrain, but at least you can be assured that you're not scenting up country that you're maybe going to walk into the next day or the next morning or even days to come. And don't underestimate what scenting an area does for those older mature animals. They will bunker down and it'll become harder to find them. So weather is an important element, and look, particularly if bad weather rolls through, just hunker down. I mean, I still hunt in the shit weather anyway. I can't sit still. I've had very few camp days in my life. In fact, probably the only camp day I've ever had was when a mate of mine, Joe Gray, and Glenn Skeet Camp, sent a big boulder down a hill and it collected my calf muscle and basically I'm surprised I didn't break my leg, but anyway, I got back to camp and
Yeah, a bit gutted really. I don't think I've ever had a camp day before. Basically just going to do nothing. Fucking boring.
even if it's shit weather, I'll still hunt. That doesn't deter me. I'll just maybe get lower if the cloud's high. If it's wet, I put all my wet weather gear on and, you know, try my luck. So, you know, with the weather in mind, I particularly enjoy when a front comes blasting through, and you know, the deer or pigs, chamois, tar, whatever, they don't like that weather. I mean, no one likes to be blasted with a snow flurry or some cold wet wind and have a wet ass for a day or so. So as soon as that sun comes out, that's prime time to be up in the high country, and, you know, plan your hunts around getting onto warm faces where it's sunny and sheltered from the wind as soon as that shitty front moves through. I guess maybe this is a good segue to talk about how understanding the climate and the weather plays into decision making for times of the year to hunt. I am purposefully going to hunt sambar in early August, and I love early August. Even mid-August, late August is still good, but early August is great for a number of reasons. One, lots of snow, you know, which does lots of things. It cuts out a lot of people that are maybes and teetering on, oh, should I give it a crack or not? You know, it really does cut the men from the boys, and so going in August, early August, a great time to get out, get away from the crowds. The snow that you'll get in early August, if you get up into the high country pretty deep on that main dividing range, pushes those sambar down. I had one of the most fantastic trips in 2008 where there was just snow like right down to 800 metres, and sure enough the sign was thick just in that last layer of snow before it was in the snow melt zone, and you know, it was a concentrated area for deer. They were all just bunkered down in that bottom, that wasn't even a third, it was the bottom fifth of the valley. And, you know, I walked onto 5 good mature stags in one day. I think I've seen something like 30 odd deer in a day, missed 5 good stags and ended up shooting a ripper which went 30 inches by 34. And, you know, that coincided with early August as well. Cold, winter snow pushed the deer down, and what that does is it sort of condenses the area where deer will be, because they want to avoid that cold, harsh, you know, climate, and it sort of puts them into, you know, this is just for illustrative purposes only, but if you could imagine that all of this is in snow and it's pushing them down into this lower creek sort of zone in that bottom fifth, you've suddenly got a much higher probability of bumping into a much larger quantity of deer. And so, you know, hunting in winter is a good time to go. I used to love going for reds in May, not too, and I've been in June as well. Shot some stags in June. Seen some bachelor groups trying to get a bit of feed on before it gets proper winter. And, you know, tracking in snow is easy. Once you find an animal moving through snow, it can be a chamois or a tar. That's relatively easy to track, and it's good to know. It's easy to know if it's fresh or not. And those deer, or those animals, will generally, especially deer anyway, will seek out those warmer faces. And so, you know, with the snow pushing the deer down and it being cold, so then you focus on the north faces, you've just wiped out something like 75% of the area that is where you're hunting down to 25%. And so you focus on those hot spots. You look for the warmer northeast facing slopes for first light, northwest facing slopes for last light, and, you know, stay below the snow line, stay in areas where there's still access to food. And look, food availability is something I haven't really touched on, but it's a given. Understand your terrain and understand where, you know, where your food, where the deer or the animal species food groups are, and target those. And in winter time, I mean, the deer won't move as far, and they generally don't seek out the food like they will as it warms up, but they're still hungry. They still do eat, and you can still find them close to those food sources in those warm faces. I was told this from my hunting mentor Stan Lowe: if you think like a deer, you get a deer. You know, think like a deer to get a deer was his motto. If it's been raining or snowing and it's really cold, particularly if it's raining in winter and it wets the bush, there's nothing worse than being wet in a cold, wintry, dark bit of bush. You will want to find an open, warm, north-facing slope. So put yourself in their shoes. Just think, fuck, what would I do in this cold shithole? You would want to be where it's warm, getting sun. All they want is warmth. They want some food, they want shelter. So keeping that simple motto in mind, think like a deer to get a deer, is the best advice I was ever given.